We're going to get started here, and welcome to Federal and State Affairs. We're going to have we're going to hold off on bill introductions until we get a quorum, but we'll have a hearing. Well, we have a quorum now. So are there any bill introductions? Seeing none, I think we can slip on past that one. So we're going to have a hearing this morning on Senate Bill 367. And we only have one oral opponent, one oral proponent, and one neutral oral. So we can probably limit our time to 10 minutes max on each one of those and get this done efficiently. So before we get started, let's have Jason give us a bill brief on Senate Bill 367. Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 367 amends the Transparency in Revenues Underwriting and Elections Act. That's KSA 25-2436. This is a general election criminal statute that was first enacted in 2021 that currently makes it a felony for an election official to knowingly accept or spend any monies that are received from a person for the purpose of conducting an election unless that expenditure and receipt is approved by the legislature or otherwise permitted by state law. And person we're talking about here, we're talking about a private individual or private company or other nonprofit organization. There are a couple of exemptions under current law, such as when the election official is assessing a fee or a charge to a candidate or other person, they can receive those funds, and also campaign contributions to a candidate who is running for a county clerk would be permitted in those cases. Senate Bill 367 expands this prohibition in two ways. First, the bill would include monies that are provided from any branch, agency, department, office, or bureau of the federal government. So not only private monies, but also federal government monies would be subject to the prohibition. The second expansion under Senate Bill 367 would prohibit expenditures of these monies for election-related activities. So not only in the conduct of elections, but also in election-related activities such as voter registration and voter assistance efforts, which are spelled out in the bill, on lines 24, 25, and 26. The penalty for violating the statute does not change. It would still be a level 9 non-person felony, and these changes would go into effect on July 1st if enacted. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Committee questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And I'm sorry, I was a couple minutes late coming in here. I guess my question is, who is doing this, or who is this going to prohibit from spending federal funds on an election? I don't understand who's being targeted or anything like that. That's the wrong word. I didn't mean to say targeted, but thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 367, the statute prohibits election officials from receiving or expending these funds. You're talking about your county clerks, your election commissioners, your secretary of state. Those election officials could not receive and spend these monies currently from private individuals and organizations, and under this bill, they also could not receive and expend federal monies without getting approval from the legislature beforehand.
Any other questions? I think it'll become clearer after you hear the proponent testimony of why this is being considered. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it very much. Our first oral proponent is via WebEx. It's Stuart Whitson, who's a visiting fellow with Opportunity Solutions Project. We have Stuart on the line.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, Stuart, and we'll give you 10 minutes for testimony, and then we'll open for questions.
Thank you. Chair Thompson, Vice Chair Clues, and honorable members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Stuart Whitson, and I'm a visiting fellow at the Opportunity Solutions Project. OSP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that seeks to enhance the lives of all Americans by improving welfare, workforce, healthcare, and election integrity policy at both the state and federal levels. So today I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 367. The U.S. Constitution places primary responsibility for deciding the times, places, and manner of elections squarely on the shoulders of the state legislature, with limited oversight from Congress. Nowhere does the U.S. Constitution allow the president or the agencies led by his political appointees to interfere in the administration of elections, and for good reason. Yet that is precisely what the current administration is attempting to do through Executive Order 14019. So the order commands every federal agency to use their power and resources, including their federal offices located in the state of Kansas, to engage in a first of its kind get out the vote effort in close and secret coordination with hand-selected third-party groups allied to the president's political party. Obviously, there's a legitimate concern that taxpayer-funded resources are being used to try to tip the scales of the next election in favor of the current president's political party. Regardless of the political party you happen to hail from, the order should worry you, since there's nothing to stop a future president from the other political party from attempting to engage in this same kind of improper behavior to keep himself in power. So the bill SB 367 offers one important way you, the Kansas State Legislature, can help keep the federal executive branch out of the administration of Kansas elections by limiting the ability of the administration to use federal agency funds to help carry out this executive order. So such improper behavior might involve enticing a state or local official to interpret a voting law in a way that benefits the president's political party in exchange for federal funding. It might also entail efforts by the administration to direct funding only to those districts that predominantly support the current president's political party, the same way Mark Zuckerberg did in 2020, or only to those agencies who interact primarily with potential voters deemed more likely to vote for the current president's political party. Federal election funding would then be used to finance, on the backs of all Kansas taxpayers, get out the vote efforts in Kansas designed to benefit only one political party. So while this bill would not solve all the problems created by President Biden's unlawful order, it would help this legislature to ensure that all election funding is allocated fairly and in a manner that will promote free and fair elections while inspiring voter confidence. So one way this bill might be strengthened is by adding language requiring approval from this legislature before any federal agency may be designated by the state as a voter registration agency under Section 7 of the National Voter Registration Act, and rendering null and void any previous designations unless and until approved by this legislature. So this would, of course, include Haskell Indian Nations University, which, according to the Biden administration, was designated at some point in 2022, though it remains unclear by whom the designation was made. And it would also protect against other federal agencies who may already supposedly be designated under the NVRA that we just don't know about yet. So with that, I'll strongly urge you to vote in favor of this bill, and I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Is there anyone who in the committee would like to also speak as a proponent? Seeing none, committee, I'll open for questions for Stuart on this bill. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and remind me again, you're with which organization, please?
Mr. Chair, I'm with Opportunity Solutions Project.
Okay, the one based out of Florida.
Yes.
Here's my question. Can you tell me how nonpartisan registration is designed to benefit one political party?
Nonpartisan voter registration isn't. But what we're talking about isn't nonpartisan registration. What we're talking about is targeted voter registration only in those districts that have historically voted predominantly Democrat. So the kind of voter registration we're talking about is partisan voter registration.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Stuart. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All righty. Up next, we have our neutral testimony from, we also have, by the way, written proponent testimony from 3 people you might review. Next up is our oral neutral testimony from Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's office. And Clay, welcome once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel, Kansas Secretary of State. We're neutral on this bill because basically we don't understand its purpose, despite the proponent's testimony. First of all, it only applies to election officials. Doesn't apply to the governor's office, doesn't apply to other statewides, doesn't apply to any county government except the county election officers. So in essence, they're excluded from this bill. Second, all the federal election money that comes into Kansas are grants from the Help America Vote Act. They come to our office. They are either administration or security focused, so they come with a very narrow set of things they can be used for. They're audited, they're inspected, and they already go through the legislative process. We're in front of both Senate Ways and Means and House General Government Budget explaining what we're going to spend this money on, so the legislature already approves it. And I don't know of any other federal money that comes to the Kansas state government. It's possible there's some security money that I'm just unaware of, but we don't know anything about it. And as far as we know, no federal money has ever been used for registration purposes. It's, again, security, and by administration, I mean training election officials or paying the costs of the voter registration database. We also weren't sure what the word indirectly, and that was a legacy word from the original statute, how you indirectly spend federal money. You get it and you spend it. I'm not sure if indirect means it goes down the chain. I'd also like to address an issue that was brought up, voter registration agencies. Now, a voter registration agency just means if any customer comes to that entity, they're given a voter registration card and offered a chance to register, that they can take it with them or they give it back to the agency and they turn it in. That's it. In Kansas, and I don't know how it works in other states, no one is designated a voter registration agency. Since the law was passed in Kansas defining them, and it's 252303 in 1996, an entity either is or isn't a voter registration agency. And a lot of them probably don't even realize they have that title. They just know they give out voter registration cards. So Haskell Indian Nations University has been a voter registration agency since 1996. It's also required to hand out voter registration cards under the Higher Education Act. And Haskell is a federal installation, one of two in the nation that work with Native American students primarily. So they're kind of special category there. And I believe that the governor's office gave them a certificate that just sort of memorialized the fact that they're a voter registration agency, but that in no way designated them or changed their process. They've always been one, or at least since 1996. And Mr. Chair, I'd be open to any questions if anyone has. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, one more thing. President Biden's executive order, as far as the Secretary of State's office is concerned and the county election officers, that has no effect on our operations. That's essentially the president telling federal agencies to do things to register more voters. That's outside our zone. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator Longvine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Clay, for being here. Our proponent described the executive order as unlawful. Do you know whether that is opinion or fact? Or there are court challenges to the executive order? Has a court ruled on the executive order? Are you aware of, you talked about the executive order that's been in place. It was described as unlawful, so I'm just trying to figure out whether that's factual or an opinion.
Senator, I haven't heard of any court giving an opinion that it's unlawful. Some people may have that personal opinion. I know there has been litigation for open records of what agencies were doing to carry out the executive order, what they decided to do more voter registration activity. But I really don't follow it.
And see whether it's unlawful or not.
And Mr. Senator, we really don't follow the executive order. It wasn't directed at our state operations, only the federal agencies.
Jason, would you have any opinion on that?
Mr. Chairman, I have no knowledge that the executive order has been challenged or declared unlawful by any court.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Clay. Are you aware of any third-party organizations here in the state of Kansas that maybe work with any of our state agencies in voter registration?
Senator, I think you're going to hear from Mr. Hammond that maybe a little more about the governor's agreement that was done in, I believe, fall of 2021. And I believe, and I don't know if this is exactly what you meant, but sometimes the agency of the state will give its sort of stamp of approval to a third-party group's voter registration efforts. They're not expending federal or state money, but they sort of say, along with, you know, this group, this group, this group, and this state agency are doing a voter registration drive. And that kind of gives the stamp of approval of a state agency. But I don't believe any state funds are spent, but I don't know that for sure. But not from the county election officers or the Secretary of State's.
Maybe rephrase the question to, would it be possible that there would be biasness depending on who was actually governor at the time to certain third-party groups that are working with state agencies?
Senator, I'm sure that governors have a lot of control over the agencies that directly report to them, and they could encourage agencies to get out and register voters. I don't know the rules about whether they can expend money on that if it wasn't approved by the legislature.
Thank you.
There was, and this bill derived from our interim committee work with regard to the quote unquote, what they call Biden bucks, money that came down, and the governor had a memo of understanding that passed the money then on to third parties like ACLU, Demos, Loudlight to facilitate voter registration processes there. Would it strengthen the bill if we could, I mean, basically, I think not, this looks at election officials, but talk about state agencies before any state agency expended federal money for any kind of election purposes, that it goes through the approval process of the legislature. Not banning the use of the money, but saying, hey, legislature should look at this money before it becomes spent for whatever purpose.
Mr. Chair, that would expand I'm at a loss for a word, but it would expand the coverage of the bill from beyond election officials for sure. I just don't know how much federal money is actually would be spent on that versus state money, because usually federal money comes as a grant with a pretty specific and narrowly tailored purpose.
But in this case, it looks like the executive order from the president, specifically sent it down to the state. I mean, we've been doing a deep dive on this, and it's very difficult to get details because it's not being disclosed as to how that money. There's a memo of understanding from the governor, but it's not being disclosed as to who signed off on the use of that money, and I think that's the aim of this bill. So,
and Mr. Chair, I may have got the wrong year. I believe the executive order was March 2021. I may have said 2022, and I believe the
21
agreement with the governor and some outside groups about their duties under the National Voter Registration Act to give voter registration cards when people come to get benefits was October 2021 is when it was signed. But I'm not sure if those two are interrelated at all.
What I might do is provide the committee with that memo of understanding so that they can see the details on that before we decide whether or not to work this. Yeah, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Clay, for being here. Can you tell me what is your understanding of the scope of reach of this bill?
Senator, right now the way we read it is the original statute banned, I know we call it Zuckerbucks, but private third-party money from being used for elections, and this expanded that to federal money, but it only applies to election officials, so the Secretary of State, county election officers, and their staffs.
And I think we would, to reach the spirit of the bill, would probably want to expand it so that anything that came from the federal government going through a state agency had to be approved before doing so.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's what didn't confuse us, but we saw election officials, and we thought all our money is already approved by our federal money is approved by the legislature.
Got it. Okay. I can see the misunderstanding on that. Okay. Thank you, Clay. Any other questions? Seeing none, appreciate that very much. Up next, we have our oral opponent, Davis Hammett from Loud Light, and we'll give you a total of 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Well, since this discussion has gone in a little bit of a different direction than the bill, I'll try to address some of the original bill points and then get to some of the things that were just brought up. Overall, it's important to remember that in 2021, this body banned election offices from being able to accept any sort of grants or anything like that from non-government agencies, which is a sort of unique carve-out. For example, a library could accept funding from like the Dolly Parton, the Dolly Parton Imagination Program. Lots of agencies across the state might create agreements to get a nonprofit grant for a program. And so they carved off and banned election officials from being able to do that. Now this would ban, essentially create a de facto ban on any federal aid. And as has been discussed, how this would play out is very unclear. Even in the original bill, how it says direct or indirect, what exactly that means is questionable. Of course, there's issues with HAVA money, which gets into maintaining the voter registration database, gets into emergency election security funds, and could potentially create situations where if you imagine a very significant disaster happening in Kansas where the federal government might want to declare a state of emergency to provide emergency aid, how this would play out related to elections is completely unclear under this bill. There are also compliance concerns because, for example, maintaining that voter database, the Secretary of State doing that is part of federal law. And so when the legislature puts itself between that, there's some questions about that. And it appears from my reading of this that it's not sort of that the legislature could review something. It's that the legislature has to pass a bill or appropriation bill into law for any of this federal aid to be accepted. Also, I think it's important to note when we discuss this that the Kansas government does not fund elections. The state government does not provide aid to county clerks to run this. Our elections are run. They get sometimes the occasional tiny bit of federal aid to assist, like for updating machines, but it's run by the county government, and they have to rely on the county commission approving those funds. To kind of depart from this bill and to get into the bigger discussion of the previous two conferees, it is my understanding, I actually didn't even know about this executive order until the interim committee when this was brought up, which is quite the experience to hear sort of what I would describe as fanciful conspiracies. I can tell you that we do not receive any federal or state, any government money to do our work. I do not know of any nonprofit in Kansas. I mean, I could be wrong, but not that I know of that receives state or federal money to do voter registration. We actually haven't been able to do voter registration for the last several years because of a law passed in 2021, and next Tuesday we'll be at the Kansas Supreme Court arguing about that. So it is also, I haven't been able to review it in detail, and I did not know that that was the motivating factor of this bill, but it's my understanding that that executive order too is not you shall do this, they have to do it. It was sort of voluntary guidelines, like you should improve the federal agencies, how they're offering this. I'm not completely prepared to speak about that MOU discussion because to get too in-depth, I would want to consult with our attorneys before. I can't tell you that that was actually about after, I believe it was in 2019, Loud Light was represented by the ACLU and Demos. We have participated in a sort of analyzing the state's compliance with the National Voter Registration Act, and we found a variety of what I would describe as egregious violations. State agencies required by federal law to provide the opportunity to register to vote who were not complying with that. Counties who were required by federal law to provide forms and information in Spanish, and they were not complying with that. And so when we looked at this, this was a clear violation, in our opinion, of federal law. And instead of immediately initiating legal action against the state, we compiled this and reached out to the governor's office and asked if they would be interested in working together to come into compliance instead of launching a lawsuit. We did not make money off of that. Our attorneys did not make money off of that. In fact, this process going about it probably prevented the state from having to pay out money. And that was really about just pointing out these clear issues that we had seen and talking to the state about how they would make a plan to come into compliance with federal law. It was not about any nonprofit being authorized or given money to go out and do voter registration. So it's kind of much ado about nothing, in my opinion. It was simply trying to get the state to comply with existing federal law. I would also say more broadly, I think there's this concern of rhetoric I've heard and what I would describe as conspiracies around this. And I guess I would say, sure, I'm involved in a conspiracy to help Kansans participate in elections, to register voters. When we were doing voter registration, it is nonpartisan. Whenever you engage in these activities, you are required to act in a nonpartisan manner. So the idea of targeting people, you can't say, oh, you're that political party, I'm not going to register you to vote. That's a crime in Kansas. You have to, if you're registering voters, be open to everyone if someone tries to give you a form and turn that in a proper amount of time. So, yeah, I'm happy to stand with for questions on that, but I think a lot of this is sort of vague accusations with no substantiation.
Committee, any questions? So one of the things the proponent brought up was that registration efforts might be targeted in specific areas to effectuate a certain end. Do you see that happening?
So, I don't know, right? I mean, like, you might choose a variety of places to register to vote. I know both political party, or well, now we have multiple political parties in the state, but they might choose a specific place. I would say as far as government targeting, this idea that the government is targeting or that, you know, the president is using federal resources to target, it is a pretty concerning accusation. And I would say it's especially concerning because the one example that was provided to you was talking about Haskell University, which is one of the only sort of federal universities for Native Americans. And as I would hope everyone knows here, our country has a very complicated history whenever it comes to the rights of indigenous people. And so the idea of saying, oh, wow, this Native American university is trying to help students register to vote and that needs to be shut down, I think is a way bigger concerning issue than the contents of this bill. And so, to my knowledge, no. I mean, for example, the NVRA is about people engaging in some interaction with an agency like the DMV. It's like the NVRA is why whenever it's also called motor voter to some people, because it's whenever you're getting your driver's license, they ask, would you like to register to vote? Right, and there's a variety of government interactions where that's required under federal law for you to be provided that opportunity. But I'd also say that's a really good thing because the more opportunities people are provided to register to vote, the more likely their information is to be updated because it could trigger, oh, they moved. It gives us more accurate voter rolls. So more voter registration is actually a good thing for accurate voter rolls and election security.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a written opponent from Seal King, League of Women Voters of Kansas. Committee, what I think I'm going to do, there's some issues I think we have to look at this bill to clear up before it can go any further. So I'm going to suspend the hearing and we'll see whether or not we need to reopen that after we clarify some of the issues with the bill and go forward. So I think that's the smartest thing to do at this point. We've got several bills that we've heard in the past. I'd like to see what the will of the committee is going to be on these two bills. First is Senate Bill 375 regarding the use of artificial intelligence, and have a review of that bill from Jason.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 375 is the bill that amends two election statutes to prohibit the use of generative artificial intelligence, or AI, to alter the appearance, action, or speech of a candidate or an elected state official. And the bill would add that prohibition to the list of actions that are considered corrupt political advertising. It does so both in the general election crime 25-2407 of corrupt political advertising. It also does so again within the Campaign Finance Act and KSA 25-4156. The only difference between the two amendments is the general election crime also includes altering the appearance, action, or speech of an elected state official, not just a candidate, whereas the Campaign Finance Act amendments are focused on candidates and campaigns within that are governed by that act. The bill basically creates a term called synthetic media, which is using generative AI in any image or audio or video recording to falsely depict the appearance, action, or speech of the candidate or elected state official. The penalty under both statutes is a Class C misdemeanor.
Okay, committee, any questions on this bill? So I do have one with, we were talking about print media also potentially. Would that mean somebody photoshopping a picture of somebody, places them in the context that's misleading or false? Let's say somebody took a candidate and stuck a tinfoil hat on their head. Would that be considered synthetic? Because they don't have an actual picture of the candidate with a tinfoil hat on.
Mr. Chairman, I will first point out that while my brief on the bill and a lot of the discussion on the bill involves artificial intelligence, the definition actually includes other digital technology, so the use of any computer software, not just generative AI software, is within the scope of the bill. But the definition goes on to say that the depiction to a reasonable individual is of a real individual in appearance, action, or speech, but that did not actually occur in reality. And so I think the question with the example you provided would be whether or not a reasonable individual will consider that to be an actual depiction of the individual, or if it's clearly something that has been falsified into an unrealistic portrayal.
So something that looks absurd, for example. I mean, a lot of times you'll see video or printed images of somebody that's altered to make them look, different. That wouldn't necessarily be considered synthetic. I guess I'm trying to understand where the delineation would be, and I apologize, I wasn't here when we actually heard the bill because I had a family situation, but you'll see altered images. It's an actual image of the person, but it makes them look crazy or something like that. Just trying to see what you think on that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, by the definition, the depiction would have to be such that a reasonable person would think it is a real appearance or action or speech of that individual, but that did not actually occur in reality.
Okay. Senator Reichman?
If I believe when we were talking about this issue, there is what they call the First Amendment rights for the people that are writing whatever. When I took from it, like when you have your caricatures, and they do, all that would be legal under the, I mean, that's all lawful, and I don't think this would affect that at all. Thank you.
Senator Straub?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand the difference between a caricature and an AI-generated image. AI can make somebody look, I mean, it makes it look so realistic that, and it's falsifying information to whoever you're marketing to. And I think the line may get blurred because you can easily put a mask on someone or a hat or different outfit. I know I've seen AI-generated images of Governor Greg Abbott, and they have placed his face on Elon Musk's body when Elon Musk made a fairly vulgar statement at a convention, and it looks real. I mean, it looks like it's Governor Abbott. It doesn't look like Elon Musk. And if had you not seen the other image, you probably wouldn't know what the reference is to. But I think during the day of this hearing, I didn't realize we were going to work it today. I have an amendment to this. I fully support it, but I think that the $1,000 punishment is, I mean, that's the cost of doing business for different PACs and organizations. And most of this AI-generated images with, especially in politics, is not coming from individual campaigns. I mean, none of us can afford to employ a graphic designer or somebody who's good at manipulating images. But this is done quite often by the larger PACs and lobbying organizations. But I would have an amendment to prohibit those, any entity or candidate from playing in Kansas politics for a period of 2 decades. I think that would actually stop the real problem here, which is falsifying someone's image. And it should be illegal to use someone's likeness or image and making them look like something that they are not.
I can, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions. Kind of one picking off Senator Straub's comment about, I guess, illustrating someone who they're not. I believe Senator Peck just showed me an illustration in his local paper where the editor made him really fat, like put a lot more weight than he really had. So I guess the question is, would this bill then make that illegal? Or what maybe your amendment, just something for you to think about, would that your amendment make that illegal? And then going back to Senator Reichman's point about freedom of speech, I mean, that's obviously inappropriate for them to do that, but I guess we live in a free country. Second question I have is really probably for Jason. So I believe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago during the New Hampshire primaries, an organization used AI to falsify Joe Biden's voice to discourage voters to go vote. And the goal of this robocall was to hurt Joe Biden's primary chances in New Hampshire. And so I guess my question is this bill cover that? We don't want people's voice to be misused, or, whether it's Donald Trump's or Joe Biden's or anybody whose voice is well recognized, calling into voters and confusing them or saying false things that are just blatantly untrue using AI.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the bill does cover audio recordings, but it is limited to candidates and elected state officials. So I'm not sure that it would cover presidents or presidential candidates for election. I would have to look into both acts to see if their scope would cover those offices or not.
I'm guessing you're talking about stuff that would originate outside the state too. So we wouldn't have control over something like that if they bought a political ad from outside of the state and it was, say, from a station in Kansas City, Missouri. We wouldn't, our Kansans would see that ad, but.
I'm just saying, if there was I understand that there's a TV station maybe on the Missouri side, but if they're broadcasting into Kansas homes, let's say if Governor Kelly saying things that she never said, but the AI is so good, it makes it look so real to embarrass her. I mean, that would be a problem. I mean, wouldn't we be able to litigate that?
It's
a federal thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I think what I'm going to do is suspend work on this so we can get your amendment, Senator Straub, and maybe answer some of those questions. Senator Cluse?
Okay. May I just Just lost my train of thought here.
I'll let you get it back on track. I can allow Senator Holscher while you think about it, if that's okay, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and this will give you a minute there. I would appreciate the suspension because I also have an amendment. I wasn't aware we were working this bill today because there does need to be some clarification in regard to the liability issue. I forgot that you weren't here when the bill was heard, but yes, there does need to be some clarification, like I said, in regard to the liability issue that was brought up during the hearing.
Okay, what we'll do is, Senator Cluse, did you get the train back on track?
Yeah, let me just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, the scope of the bill is for elected officials or candidates, is my understanding. So we're talking about the legal ramifications, the constitutionality of that. I don't know, we may just need a little more legal advice on that. I think both senators here brought some good points, so maybe we need to do a little deeper dive on that.
Let's try to, like I said, we'll suspend working it for now until we can answer some of those questions, and try to, maybe we'll probably try to work this Monday or Tuesday before turning around if we can. So we'll suspend the working on 375. I'd like to also get the will of the committee on Senate Bill 365, which is the simple bill on requiring advance ballots be returned by 7 p.m. And Jason, any comments on refreshing our memory on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 365 is the bill that amends one statute regarding advance voting ballots to require those ballots be returned to the county election office by 7 p.m. on the date of election. It would do away with the 3-day post-election period for receipt of those ballots in order to be, and still be part of the canvass.
Thank you, Jason. And committee, the interim committee on elections, we heard from the former chairman, and he's testified before the committee about the fact that the reason they instituted the 3-day grace period was for the military, but or the UOCAVA allows them, 45 days, and they get special carve out for emailing in. And so this would just simply allow that the ballots for everyone, advance voters in person or via mail, be in hand to the election official by 7 p.m. Any discussion, committee? Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much. I wasn't there for the hearing, and just my thoughts on it is that the Secretary of State yesterday mentioned, or I guess it wasn't in this one, that he didn't like to have any major legislation and changing the rules, during the election. I guess it was in another committee. But there's a part of it too is that people are concerned for, well, the post office, and some in my district, it goes to Texas before it comes back, so that's a concern. But on the other side of it, people are concerned about election security and integrity, and even though not all the votes would be in, ballots would be in because of military or whatever, this would give a little more surety that is, this is a day line, and you still need to be held accountable. We know when the day is, working. So, not hearing the testimony, those are my thoughts that were going through my mind. Where I go, I'm not going to satisfy myself. I thank you.
Thanks, Senator Reichman. Any other? Senator Holscher.
Thank you. I have major concerns with this. This bill will throw out valid ballots. And additionally, kind of to the point by the previous senator, this would make changes during an election year, and there is no provision in this bill to educate voters about the potential change. And to me, that fuels the fire of concern by voters because, again, valid ballots would be thrown out. And I know we've heard a lot of discussion about make election day election day. this does nothing to make results quicker, faster. That process is still there as far as what happens as far as the election process itself. So like I said, I have major concerns about this, what this bill will do to the process and actually throwing out valid ballots. So I will be against it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we just get clarified. So this would take effect when, Jason, if it's passed?
This would take effect on July 1st, so it would be in effect for both the primary and general elections for this year.
Okay, thank you. And then to follow up, there was some discussion, since Senator Reichman was not here, I'm trying to recall about 21 days in advance, we have an opportunity to get a ballot, a pre-ballot. But then there was a window even before that, that one could be requested. I can't remember who was speaking towards that.
It was Secretary of State, and they can request an advance ballot 90 days in advance, as I recall. Whitney, if you'd like to step up and if you know that number, but I think it's 90 days they can request, but then it's not sent until that 21-day.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I don't know that number. 21 days is for the voter registration deadline to end. 20 days is when advance mail ballots go out. As far as the window before that, I don't know, but I can get back to you.
I believe that's right. Elena, do you have the answer? Or it's not, okay, it's 90, it's not, they can request it 90 days prior, but then it's not mailed until that 20th day prior. So that's a situation right there. Senator Cluse?
So the 90 days is on top of the 20 days, or is it's 90 days?
90 days prior to the election, they can request an advance voting ballot. And then there are also people who are on the permanent list. They get mailed those advance ballots if they put themselves on the advance list. And I had a lady who in one of my constituents said she hadn't received her mail in 5 days. So, and this was just earlier this week, and Senator Marshall is working on some problems with the U.S. Post Office. So, you know, a 3-day grace period is not going to fix that. So, you know, we would obviously want to encourage people to, if they get their advance ballot, they may want to drop it off at one of the advanced voting sites in person or the drop boxes that are available. So that's just one consideration. The post office is having some serious problems. So that's a completely different discussion. So any other comments or questions? Seeing none, what is the will committee on this bill? Senator Straub?
Mr. Chair, I would move to pass Senate Bill 365 favorably.
Motion by Senator Straub to pass out 365 favorably. Is there a second? Second by Senator Blasey. Any discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Okay. The motion passes, and we will send that to the Senate floor and see what happens once again. Committee, that is it. Again, on Senate Bill 375, have your amendments ready by early next week, and we'll do a little more deep dive into that bill. We have several amendments. Thank you for your work. We will have no meeting tomorrow, and we'll see you on Monday. We are adjourned.